This is based on true life story, and this is Incredible Story. Here, we share authentic and heartwarming stories that touch the heart and inspire us all. Please make sure you like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Chapter 1. The Journey Begins. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of Brenda's modest apartment in California. The soft, golden light fell on the half-packed boxes scattered across the living room. Brenda stood by the window, gazing out at the quiet street. Her husband's absence felt heavier than ever, a void she could never quite fill. But she had made up her mind. It was time to leave. California held too many memories, and each one pulled her deeper into grief. Moving to Texas was her chance to start anew, for herself and her family. With a heavy sigh, Brenda turned and picked up a framed photo from the table. It was one of her husband, smiling brightly with their 2 kids, Kelly and Cameron. She ran her fingers over the glass. "I hope I'm doing the right thing," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Mom," Kelly's voice broke through her thoughts. Brenda turned to see her 15-year-old daughter standing at the door, her arms crossed. Kelly's long braids were tied into a loose ponytail, and her face bore the reluctant expression typical of a teenager. "Do we really have to go? Can't we just stay here? I'll get a part-time job or something." Brenda forced a smile. "Kelly, it's not just about money. We need a fresh start. Texas will be good for us. Your Uncle Reggie already agreed to come along. He'll help us settle in." Kelly rolled her eyes. "Uncle Reggie? Great. That'll make everything so much better," she muttered sarcastically before walking away. Brenda sighed again, this time deeper. She loved her daughter, but Kelly had been taking her father's death the hardest. Brenda couldn't blame her. Losing him had shaken their entire family. In the other room, Cameron, her 8-year-old son, sat on the floor playing with a battered toy car. "Do we have to drive all the way to Texas, Mom?" he asked without looking up. "Yes, sweetheart," Brenda said, crouching next to him. "We'll make it fun, though. We'll stop at cool places along the way. It's an adventure." "Is Dad coming with us?" Cameron's innocent question made Brenda's heart ache. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "No, honey. Dad's watching over us. But he'll always be with us in our hearts." The boy nodded solemnly, his small face a mix of understanding and confusion. Brenda kissed the top of his head and stood up just as the sound of a car horn blared outside. "Reggie's here," she said, more to herself than anyone else. She walked to the front door and opened it to see her younger brother stepping out of his beat-up sedan. Reggie was in his late 30s, with a lean build and an energy that seemed out of place for a man his age. He was carrying a duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a mischievous grin on his face. "Ready for the great Texas adventure?" Reggie called out, spreading his arms dramatically. Brenda gave him a look. "Reggie, this isn't a vacation." "I know, sis. But you need some excitement in your life. Road trips are supposed to be fun." He walked past her into the apartment, dropping his bag by the couch. "Where's my favorite niece and nephew?" "Uncle Reggie," Cameron shouted, running up to him. Reggie scooped the boy up and spun him around. "There's my man. You ready to hit the road?" Cameron laughed. "Yeah, but Mom says it's going to be a long drive." "Well, that's the best part." Reggie winked. "We'll play card games, eat junk food, and listen to terrible music. Right, Kelly?" Kelly appeared in the doorway, arms still crossed. "Don't involve me in your weird plans, Uncle Reggie." Reggie put a hand over his heart, pretending to be hurt. "Come on, Kelly. You used to think I was the coolest uncle ever." "That was when I was 8. "Fair enough," Reggie replied with a chuckle. He turned to Brenda. "All right, let's get this show on the road." The family car was packed to the brim. Suitcases, boxes, and random household items were crammed into every available space. Brenda double-checked the straps holding the luggage on the roof rack. "Reggie, are you sure this is secure?" "Relax, sis. I've tied it up so well, even a tornado couldn't budge it." Brenda wasn't convinced, but she let it go. She climbed into the driver's seat, with Kelly and Cameron in the back and Reggie riding shotgun. The car felt cramped, but it was all they had. As they pulled out of the driveway, Brenda took one last look at the apartment. This was it, the start of a new chapter. The drive started off uneventful. Reggie fiddled with the radio, switching between static-filled stations until he found one playing old-school hip-hop. He turned up the volume. "This is what I'm talking about. Can you turn that down?" Kelly snapped from the back seat. "Not everyone wants to go deaf." Reggie turned to her with mock seriousness. "Kelly, you need to appreciate good music. It builds character." Brenda shook her head. "Reggie, leave her alone." "Fine, fine," he said, lowering the volume. Then, after a pause, he added, "But she really does need to loosen up." Kelly glared at him. "I'm not the one who got fired from 3 jobs in a row." "Kelly," Brenda said sharply, glancing at her daughter in the rear-view mirror. "That's enough." Reggie laughed it off. "Hey, she's not wrong. But for the record, 2 of those firings weren't my fault." Brenda sighed. The banter was typical of Reggie, but it only added to her stress. She focused on the road, trying to block out the tension in the car. A few hours later, they pulled into a small gas station in the middle of nowhere. Brenda parked near the pumps and stepped out to stretch her legs. The air was dry and hot, with a faint smell of gasoline. "All right, everyone, bathroom break," she announced. Kelly and Cameron got out reluctantly, while Reggie wandered off to check out the convenience store. Brenda walked over to the pump and started filling the tank. As she did, she noticed a group of men standing near a beat-up truck at the edge of the lot. They were smoking and talking in low voices, their eyes occasionally darting toward her car. Brenda felt a chill despite the heat. Something about them didn't sit right. She tried to ignore them, focusing instead on the numbers ticking up on the pump. Inside the store, Reggie grabbed a bag of chips and a soda. As he walked to the counter, he accidentally bumped into one of the men from outside. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with a menacing glare. "Watch where you're going," the man growled. "Hey, my bad," Reggie said, holding up his hands. "Didn't see you there." The man didn't respond, just gave Reggie a hard look before walking past him. Reggie paid for his snacks and walked back to the car, shaking his head. "What's his problem?" he muttered. When he reached the car, Brenda was already back in the driver's seat. "Reggie, what took you so long?" she asked impatiently. "Ran into a jerk in the store," he said, climbing into the passenger seat. "Don't worry, I didn't start anything." Brenda gave him a skeptical look, but didn't press the issue. As they pulled out of the gas station, she noticed the men by the truck watching them closely. One of them muttered something to the others, and they all left. Brenda's grip on the steering wheel tightened. A few miles down the road, Reggie glanced in the side mirror. "Ooh, Brenda? I think that truck's following us." Brenda glanced in the rear-view mirror. Sure enough, the beat-up truck was a few cars behind them. Her heart sank. "Probably just a coincidence," she said, trying to convince herself as much as the others. "Yeah, sure," Reggie said, though his tone wasn't convincing. "But just in case, maybe drive a little faster." Brenda pressed the accelerator slightly, her eyes darting between the road ahead and the mirror. The truck stayed in sight, its headlights glaring like a predator stalking its prey. Kelly leaned forward. "Mom, what's going on?" "Nothing, sweetheart," Brenda said, forcing a calm tone. "Just keep your seatbelt on." The tension in the car was palpable as they continued down the highway, the truck never far behind. Whatever lay ahead, Brenda knew this was just the beginning of their journey and the challenges they were about to face. Chapter 2: A Deadly Encounter. The family pulled into the parking lot of a dimly lit motel late in the evening. The neon vacancy sign flickered erratically, casting a faint red glow over the cracked asphalt. Brenda parked the car and let out a tired sigh. The drive had been long and tense, especially with the unsettling feeling of being followed earlier. But now, all she wanted was a good night's rest. "All right, everyone out," Brenda said, turning off the ignition. She glanced at her children in the back seat. Cameron was already half asleep, his head lolling to one side, while Kelly was scrolling on her phone with a blank expression. "Ugh, this place looks like something out of a horror movie," Kelly muttered as she stepped out of the car. "It's all we can afford right now," Brenda replied, her voice firm but weary. "Let's just make it through the night." Reggie stretched and yawned as he got out of the passenger seat. Come on, Kelly. A little adventure never hurt anyone. Think of it as character building. Kelly rolled her eyes. Whatever. Brenda walked into the motel lobby, where a tired-looking clerk sat behind the desk. He barely glanced up as she requested a room, handing her a key with the number 7 etched onto the tag. Checkouts at 10 a.m., he mumbled, returning his attention to a small television playing static. Friendly place, Reggie remarked sarcastically as Brenda returned to the car with the key. She ignored him and started unloading their bags. Room 7 was small and dingy, with faded wallpaper and a faint musty smell. There were 2 double beds pushed against the walls, leaving just enough space for a tiny nightstand in between. A bulky old TV sat on a rickety dresser, its screen coated with a thin layer of dust. I'm not sleeping here, Kelly declared, standing in the middle of the room with her arms crossed. You don't have a choice, Brenda said, tossing a bag onto one of the beds. Just try to get some rest. We'll be back on the road first thing in the morning. Cameron climbed onto the other bed and immediately lay down, clutching his favorite blanket. Can we leave the light on, Mom? Brenda nodded. Of course, baby. Reggie flopped onto the bed next to Cameron. Home sweet home, he said with a grin, earning another glare from Kelly. Brenda rubbed her temples, already feeling the beginnings of a headache. All right, everyone, just settle down. The family began unpacking, their movements slow and quiet. The tension from the day lingered in the air like a heavy fog. Brenda sat on the edge of her bed, scrolling through her phone to check the map for their next route. The faint sound of a TV playing in the next room filtered through the thin walls. Suddenly, there was a loud thud, followed by muffled shouting. Brenda froze, her ears straining to catch the sounds. The noise grew louder, an angry male voice yelling, followed by the sound of something crashing to the floor. Did you hear that? Brenda whispered, looking up at Reggie. He nodded, his expression turning serious. Sounds like trouble. Stay here, Brenda said, standing and moving toward the window. She pulled back the curtain slightly and peeked outside. The parking lot was empty except for their car and a dark sedan parked near the neighboring room. What's going on? Kelly asked, her voice tinged with worry. Nothing you need to worry about, Brenda replied, trying to sound calm. Just stay in the room. The shouting continued, and then there was a sudden silence. Brenda felt her stomach tighten. A moment later, the door to the neighboring room burst open, and a man stumbled out, clutching a black briefcase. His face was pale, and his eyes darted around wildly, as if he were being hunted. He limped toward the sedan, fumbling for his keys. Before he could reach the car, another man emerged from the room, tall and broad-shouldered, holding a gun. The man with the briefcase turned, panic flashing across his face. No, please. I can get the rest of the money, he shouted. The gunman didn't reply. The deafening crack of a gunshot rang out, and the man with the briefcase collapsed onto the pavement. Brenda gasped, stepping back from the window. Mom, what was that? Cameron asked, sitting up in bed. Stay here, Brenda repeated, her voice shaking. She turned to Reggie, who was already moving toward the door. Reggie, no. I just want to see what's going on, he said, grabbing the room key. Stay put. Before Brenda could stop him, Reggie slipped out the door. She cursed under her breath and hurried after him. Reggie, come back, she hissed, keeping her voice low. But Reggie was already halfway to the neighboring room. The gunman had disappeared, leaving the body and the briefcase behind. Reggie crouched next to the man, checking for a pulse. Brenda reached him just as he shook his head. He's gone, Reggie said grimly. We need to get back to our room, Brenda whispered urgently. Now. Reggie's eyes fell on the briefcase, lying next to the body. What do you think's in there? Reggie, don't even think about it. But he was already reaching for the briefcase. He flipped the latches and opened it, revealing stacks of neatly packed cash. Brenda's breath caught in her throat. Oh my God, she whispered. Close it and put it back. Are you kidding? Do you see how much money this is? Reggie said, his voice low but excited. This could solve all your problems, Brenda. This isn't our money, she snapped. And whoever killed that man is going to come looking for it. We need to go. Reggie hesitated for a moment before snapping the briefcase shut. Fine, but I'm taking it with us. No, you're not, Brenda said, grabbing his arm. Reggie, please. Brenda, think about it. You're struggling to make ends meet. This is a way out. Before she could argue further, the sound of tires screeching made them both look up. A black SUV had pulled into the parking lot, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Brenda's heart pounded as the doors opened and several men stepped out, all armed. Reggie, run, she whispered harshly, dragging him back toward their room. The two of them sprinted across the lot, ducking into their room and locking the door behind them. Kelly and Cameron stared at them, wide-eyed. What's going on? Kelly demanded. No time to explain, Brenda said, grabbing her purse. We need to leave. Now. Mom, what's happening? Cameron asked, his voice trembling. Everything's fine, baby, Brenda said, forcing a smile she didn't feel. Just stay close to me. Reggie grabbed their bags while Brenda peeked out the window. The men were fanning out, searching the motel. One of them approached their car and peered inside. We can't go out the front, Brenda whispered. They're watching. Then we go out the back, Reggie said, pointing to the small bathroom window. It's too small, Brenda argued. Not for the kids, Reggie replied. We'll send them through first. Brenda hesitated but knew he was right. Okay, Cameron, Kelly, listen to me. You're going to climb out the window and wait for us behind the building. Stay low and stay quiet. Do you understand? Kelly nodded, her face pale. Cameron clutched her hand, his eyes wide with fear. One by one, they climbed out the window. Reggie went next, followed by Brenda. The family crouched in the shadows behind the motel, their breaths coming in quick, shallow gasps. From their hiding spot, Brenda could hear the men kicking down doors, searching for the briefcase. Her mind raced. They needed to get to the car, but the men were too close. We'll circle around to the other side, she whispered. Stay close to me. Reggie carried Cameron while Kelly clung to Brenda's arm. They moved as quickly and quietly as they could, keeping to the shadows. When they reached the car, Brenda fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking. Hurry, Brenda, Reggie urged, glancing over his shoulder. Just as Brenda unlocked the door, one of the men spotted them. Hey, they've got it, he shouted. Get in, Brenda yelled, shoving the kids into the back seat. Reggie jumped into the passenger seat as Brenda started the car. The men opened fire, bullets shattering the rear window as Brenda floored the gas pedal. The car screeched out of the lot, leaving the motel and their pursuers behind. For a moment, the only sound was their ragged breathing. Then Cameron spoke up, his voice small and trembling. Are they going to come after us? Brenda glanced at him in the rearview mirror, her heart breaking. Not if I can help it, she said firmly, gripping the wheel. But deep down, she knew their troubles were only beginning. Chapter 3. On the Run. The sound of the car's tires crunching against gravel filled the air as Brenda drove through an unpaved road surrounded by desolate stretches of desert. The sun had long since set, leaving the area bathed in the eerie glow of moonlight. Brenda gripped the wheel tightly, her eyes scanning the narrow dirt path ahead. She had purposely veered off the main highway hours ago, hoping to shake off their pursuers. But now, in the middle of nowhere, uncertainty weighed heavily on her. Mom, where are we going? Kelly asked from the back seat. Her voice was laced with both frustration and fear. I'm not sure, Brenda admitted, glancing at the rearview mirror to meet her daughter's worried eyes. But I know we can't go back to the highway. It's too risky. We're lost, aren't we? Kelly pressed, her tone sharper now. We're not lost, Brenda said, though her voice lacked conviction. We're just figuring it out as we go. From the passenger seat, Reggie cleared his throat. We could pull over and look at a map. Or better yet, let me drive for a while. Brenda shot him a glare. The last thing we need is for you to take charge, Reggie. Haven't you done enough already? Reggie opened his mouth to respond, but thought better of it. Instead, he sank into his seat, muttering, I was just trying to help. Cameron, who had been silent for most of the ride, finally spoke up. I'm hungry. We'll stop soon, Brenda assured him, though she had no idea where they might find food. The fuel gauge was dipping dangerously close to empty, and the endless desert offered no sign of civilization. After another hour of driving, Brenda spotted a small roadside diner in the distance. Its neon sign flickered weakly, but it was enough to give her hope. She parked the car at the far end of the lot, scanning the area for anything suspicious. The diner appeared empty, save for a single pickup truck parked near the entrance. Stay here, Brenda said firmly, turning to her family. I'll go in and grab some food to go. No way, Reggie interjected. You're not going in there alone. What if those guys are watching the place? Brenda hesitated. He had a point, but she wasn't ready to trust Reggie's judgment just yet. Fine. You can come with me. Kelly, lock the doors and don't open them for anyone. Cameron, stay close to your sister. Be careful, Kelly said, her voice softer now. Brenda nodded and stepped out of the car, Reggie following close behind. As they entered the diner, the faint smell of grease and coffee hit their noses. A tired-looking waitress stood behind the counter, flipping through a magazine. She barely looked up as they approached. What can I get you? She asked, chewing gum lazily. Brenda glanced at the menu on the wall. 2 burgers, a grilled cheese, and some fries. To go. The waitress scribbled the order on a notepad. Anything else? Reggie leaned on the counter, his voice casual. Got any pie? The waitress raised an eyebrow. Apple or cherry? Cherry, Reggie said with a grin. Brenda rolled her eyes but didn't say anything. It wasn't worth starting an argument. As they waited for the food, the door to the diner opened, and a tall man in a leather jacket walked in. Brenda's stomach tightened as she recognized the man from the motel parking lot. He didn't look at them directly, but walked to a booth near the window and sat down, his eyes scanning the room. Reggie, Brenda whispered, her voice low. That's one of them. Reggie glanced at the man, his expression darkening. What do we do? Act normal, Brenda said through gritted teeth. We'll grab the food and leave. Don't draw attention to yourself. But as the waitress handed them their order, the man stood and started walking toward them. Brenda's heart pounded as she felt his eyes on her. You look familiar, the man said, stopping a few feet away. His voice was calm, but there was a dangerous edge to it. Weren't you at the motel last night? I don't know what you're talking about, Brenda replied, keeping her voice steady. We're just passing through. The man smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Funny. I could have sworn I saw you. Reggie stepped forward, his tone defensive. Look, man, we don't want any trouble. Trouble. The man's smile widened. Who said anything about trouble? Brenda grabbed Reggie's arm and started pulling him toward the door. We were just leaving. Enjoy your night, the man called after them, his tone mocking. As soon as they were outside, Brenda shoved the food into Reggie's hands. Get in the car. Now. They sprinted back to the vehicle, and Brenda climbed into the driver's seat, her hands shaking. Kelly and Cameron looked up at her, their faces pale. What happened? Kelly asked. Nothing, Brenda said quickly. We're fine. She started the car and pulled out of the lot, her eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. The man hadn't followed them, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being watched. Hours later, Brenda finally pulled off the road and parked in a secluded area surrounded by tall desert rocks. The car's fuel was almost gone, and they couldn't afford to risk another encounter. The family climbed out, stretching their stiff limbs as the cool night air settled around them. We'll camp here for the night, Brenda said, grabbing a blanket from the trunk. It's too risky to keep driving. Camp? Kelly repeated, looking horrified. Out here? Unless you have a better idea, Brenda replied, her tone sharper than she intended. Reggie set up a small campfire using dry wood he found nearby. As the flames crackled, the family sat in a circle, eating their food in silence. The tension from earlier still lingered, but the warmth of the fire provided a small sense of comfort. After a while, Reggie cleared his throat. Look, I know I messed up. Big time. If I hadn't taken that briefcase, we wouldn't be in this mess. Brenda didn't respond at first. She stared into the fire, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. You're right. You did mess up. But what's done is done. We need to focus on staying alive. Reggie nodded. I've been thinking. These guys are professionals, right? They're not just going to give up. But we can use that against them. What do you mean? Kelly asked, her curiosity piqued. They're expecting us to run scared, Reggie explained. If we can throw them off our trail, maybe even make them think we've already ditched the money, they might back off. And how do you suggest we do that? Brenda asked, skepticism evident in her voice. We plan a decoy, Reggie said. Find something that looks like the briefcase and leave it somewhere obvious. When they take the bait, we make our move. Brenda considered his suggestion. It was risky, but it might work. All right. We'll try it. But if this goes wrong, it's on you. Reggie held up his hands. Fair enough. As the fire burned lower, Cameron leaned against Brenda's side, his eyes drooping with exhaustion. Mom, do you think Dad would have liked camping like this? Brenda smiled softly, wrapping an arm around him. Your dad loved the outdoors. He used to talk about taking us camping someday. Maybe he's watching us now, Cameron said sleepily, making sure we're okay. Maybe he is, Brenda murmured, her voice thick with emotion. Kelly, who had been quiet for most of the evening, suddenly spoke up. I miss him. A lot. Brenda reached across the circle and squeezed her daughter's hand. I know, sweetheart. I miss him too. For a moment, the chaos of the past few days faded, and the family found solace in each other's presence. The road ahead was uncertain, but together, they would face whatever came their way. Chapter 4. The Enemy Revealed. The sun was barely rising when Brenda decided they needed to leave their makeshift camp. She hadn't slept much, her mind racing with worry over the gang and the briefcase, now lying in the trunk. The events of the past few days were pushing her to her limits, but she knew she couldn't afford to falter, not with her children depending on her. Wake up, she whispered, nudging Kelly and Cameron. We need to move before it gets too bright. Kelly groaned, rubbing her eyes. Mom, can't we rest a little longer? No, sweetheart, Brenda said firmly. It's not safe here. Reggie was already awake, sitting by the dying embers of the campfire. He glanced at Brenda as she approached. You think they've found our trail yet? Brenda crossed her arms. We can't take that chance. Pack up your things. Reggie nodded, for once not arguing. Brenda appreciated his newfound seriousness, but the damage had already been done. She could still feel the weight of his impulsive decision pressing down on her, a burden they couldn't shake off. The family piled into the car, the air tense and quiet as Brenda steered them back onto the narrow back roads. The briefcase seemed to loom larger with every passing mile, an unwanted passenger in their already cramped vehicle. We should have left it behind, Brenda muttered, more to herself than anyone else. Mom, what's going to happen if they find us? Cameron asked, his small voice breaking through the silence. Brenda glanced at him in the rear-view mirror. They won't find us. I'll make sure of it. Right, Kelly said, her tone sharp. Because you're some kind of superhero now. Brenda didn't respond. Her focus was on the road ahead, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. Suddenly, Reggie stiffened in his seat. Oh, Brenda? We've got company. She followed his gaze to the mirror and saw a black SUV speeding toward them. Her stomach dropped. Everyone, hold on, she shouted, pressing her foot down on the accelerator. The old car roared in protest, but it picked up speed, the SUV closing in fast. The chase was harrowing. Brenda swerved sharply to avoid a rocky outcrop, the tires skidding on loose gravel. Behind them, the SUV gained ground, its tinted windows reflecting the sunlight like dark, menacing eyes. Can't this thing go any faster? Reggie yelled, gripping the door handle. I'm doing my best, Brenda snapped. Maybe you should have thought about this before dragging us into this mess. The SUV suddenly veered to the left, pulling alongside them. One of the windows rolled down, and Brenda caught a glimpse of a man aiming a gun. Get down, she screamed, ducking as a shot rang out. The bullet shattered the side mirror, spraying glass into the car. Cameron screamed, clutching Brenda's arm. "Mom, it's okay, baby," she said, her voice shaking. "I've got you." Reggie leaned out of the window, holding a wrench he'd grabbed from the floor. "You want a piece of me?" he yelled, throwing it at the SUV. The wrench struck the hood, but it did little to slow their pursuers. "Reggie, what are you doing?" Brenda shouted. "You're going to get us killed." "Just trying to help," he shouted back. Brenda's heart pounded as she spotted a narrow dirt path up ahead. It wasn't on the map, but it was their only chance. "Hang on," she yelled, jerking the wheel to the right. The car bounced violently as they turned onto the rough path, dust and rocks flying up behind them. The SUV hesitated for a moment before following, its larger wheels handling the terrain with ease. "This isn't working," Kelly screamed. "They're still coming." "I know," Brenda shouted back, panic rising in her chest. She spotted a sharp curve ahead, and an idea formed in her mind. It was risky, but she had no other choice. As they approached the curve, Brenda slammed on the brakes and yanked the wheel to the left. The car skidded, spinning out in a cloud of dust. The SUV, unable to slow down in time, roared past them and crashed into a cluster of boulders, its front end crumpling on impact. "Go, go, go," Reggie yelled, and Brenda didn't need to be told twice. She floored the gas pedal, the family speeding away as their pursuers scrambled to recover. The adrenaline began to fade as they put more distance between themselves and the wrecked SUV. Brenda's hands shook as she drove, her mind racing with what had just happened. "We can't keep doing this," she said, her voice trembling. "They're not going to stop until they get that briefcase." "Maybe we should just give it back," Kelly said, her voice small. "It's not worth dying over." "They won't stop even if we do," Reggie said grimly. "Not now. We're witnesses." Brenda tightened her grip on the wheel. "This is your fault, Reggie. You put my kids in danger." "I know," he said, his voice quiet. "I was stupid. I thought I was helping, but I messed up." "Messed up?" Brenda's voice cracked with emotion. "You've made us fugitives, Reggie. My children are terrified, and I don't know how we're going to get out of this." Reggie sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You think I don't feel guilty? I do. Every second of this. But you're not exactly blameless, Brenda." She glared at him. "Excuse me? You've always acted like you have to do everything on your own," he said. "Even after your husband died, you wouldn't let anyone help you. You think carrying the whole world on your shoulders makes you strong, but it doesn't. It just makes you stubborn." Brenda stared at him, stunned into silence. For a moment, the only sound was the rumble of the car's engine. "Is that why you stayed?" she asked finally, her voice quiet. "Because you thought I couldn't handle it?" "I stayed because you're my sister," Reggie said. "And because I miss him too." The argument was cut short when Brenda's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and froze. It was an unknown number. "Who is it?" Reggie asked, but Brenda didn't answer. She pulled over and answered the call, her hand shaking. "Hello?" "Brenda," a deep, calm voice said. "I was hoping we'd get a chance to talk." Her blood ran cold. "Who is this?" "Let's not play games," the man said. "You have something that belongs to me." Brenda's breath caught in her throat. "Mr. Cross." "Ah, so you've heard of me," he said, his tone almost pleasant. "That'll make this easier. Listen carefully, Brenda. I know you're scared, but this can all end if you do one simple thing." "And what's that?" Brenda asked, her voice trembling. "Return the briefcase," he said. "Bring it to the address I'll send you, and we can all go our separate ways." "And if I don't?" There was a pause, and then his tone turned icy. "If you don't, I'll start with your daughter. Kelly, isn't it? Lovely girl." Brenda's heart stopped. "Don't you dare." "Then there's Cameron," he continued. "Such a sweet boy. It would be a shame if something happened to him." Brenda's hands balled into fists. "You stay away from my children." "That's up to you," he said. "You have 24 hours. Tick-tock, Brenda." The line went dead. Brenda sat in stunned silence, the phone still clutched in her hand. Reggie watched her carefully. "What did he say?" She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. He threatened my kids. Kelly's eyes widened.
What?
Mom, what are we going to do? We're going to fight, Brenda said, her voice firm. I'm not letting him hurt any of you. Reggie frowned. Fight?
How?
We're outnumbered and outgunned. Brenda met his gaze, her expression steely. We outsmart him. You said it yourself. These guys think we're scared. We use that to our advantage. Reggie hesitated, but then nodded.
All right.
What's the plan? Brenda looked at her family, her determination hardening. She wasn't just a grieving widow anymore. She was a mother, and she would do whatever it took to protect her children. We make our move, she said. And we end this. Chapter 5. A Desperate Gamble. Brenda sat in the car, the engine off, gripping her phone tightly. The soft glow of the screen illuminated her tired face as she stared at the message she had just sent to Mr. Cross. It was a simple note, blunt and to the point. I'll return the briefcase. Send me a location. Her heart pounded in her chest. It was a dangerous bluff, but it was the only way to protect her family. She had no intention of handing over the money, not after everything they had been through. Instead, she had a plan, a risky one that relied on precise timing and the trust of her family. The phone buzzed a moment later. The reply was just as brief. Abandoned warehouse on Route 86. Come alone. Midnight. Brenda exhaled shakily and looked up at Reggie, who sat in the passenger seat. His face was etched with concern, but there was also a flicker of determination in his eyes. In the back seat, Kelly and Cameron were silent, their expressions heavy with fear. It's time, Brenda said quietly. We know where to meet him. Reggie frowned. Are you sure about this? These guys don't play around, Brenda. I'm sure, she said firmly, but we're not going in blind. We'll be ready. The plan. At a small gas station just off the highway, Brenda pulled the car into a secluded corner of the lot. With the family huddled around her, she unfolded a map of the area and placed it on the hood. All right, she began, her voice steady but low. This is where we're meeting them. She pointed to a small red X she had marked on the map. An abandoned warehouse, far from any other buildings. Perfect for what they want, a private handoff with no interruptions. Sounds like a trap, Kelly said, her arms crossed tightly. It is, Brenda admitted. But it's also an opportunity. They'll expect me to be scared, desperate to end this. They won't expect us to fight back. Reggie nodded. So, what's the plan? Brenda outlined it carefully. They would arrive early, before Mr. Cross and his men. Reggie and Kelly would set up a series of distractions around the warehouse while Brenda and Cameron created a decoy briefcase filled with random papers and rocks. The goal was to lure the gang into thinking they had the upper hand while splitting them up and buying time to escape. It's risky, Reggie said after she finished. If anything goes wrong, we don't have another choice, Brenda said, her voice firm. I won't let him hurt my kids. Kelly looked up at her mother, fear flickering in her eyes. And what if they catch us? They won't, Brenda said, forcing a confidence she didn't entirely feel. We're smarter than they are.
Setting the trap.
The warehouse was exactly as Brenda had imagined, large, rusted, and eerily quiet. Its shattered windows and peeling paint gave it an abandoned, almost haunted feel. The family arrived an hour before midnight, parking the car out of sight behind a cluster of overgrown bushes. Okay, Brenda said, her voice low as she distributed supplies. Reggie, take Kelly and set up the distractions. Remember, keep it simple, anything that will confuse them or slow them down. Cameron and I will work on the decoy briefcase. Reggie saluted half-heartedly. Got it, boss. Be careful, Brenda added, her eyes lingering on Kelly. You too, Mom, Kelly said softly. As Reggie and Kelly disappeared into the shadows, Brenda knelt beside Cameron on the dusty warehouse floor. She opened the real briefcase, her stomach churning at the sight of the money inside. It was enough to change their lives forever, but it wasn't worth the risk it had brought. All right, Cam, Brenda said, handing him a stack of old newspapers. Help me fill this up. We need to make it look real. Cameron worked silently, his small hands trembling slightly as he placed the papers into the empty briefcase. Brenda watched him, her heart aching. He was too young to be caught up in something like this. "Mom," Cameron said suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. "Do you think Dad would have been scared?" Brenda paused, her hands stilling. She looked at her son and forced a small smile. "Your dad was the bravest man I ever knew. But even brave people get scared sometimes. It's what you do with that fear that matters." Cameron nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I'm scared too. It's okay to be scared," Brenda said, pulling him into a hug. "As long as we stick together, we'll get through this." The encounter. At exactly midnight, a convoy of vehicles pulled into the warehouse lot. Brenda watched from the shadows as 3 black SUVs came to a halt, their engines rumbling ominously. The doors opened, and a group of men stepped out, armed and alert. At the center of the group was Mr. Cross. He was tall and sharply dressed, his tailored suit and polished shoes a stark contrast to the dilapidated warehouse. His eyes scanned the area, cold and calculating. "Brenda," he called out, his voice echoing through the empty space. "I know you're here. Let's not waste time." Brenda stepped out from behind a stack of crates, the decoy briefcase clutched tightly in her hand. Her heart pounded as she approached him, her footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. "You have what I want?" Mr. Cross asked, a smirk playing on his lips. "It's right here," Brenda said, holding up the briefcase. "Let's get this over with." Mr. Cross motioned to one of his men, who stepped forward to inspect the briefcase. As he opened it, a loud bang echoed through the warehouse. Reggie's distraction had begun. "What the?" one of the men shouted, turning toward the noise. At the same time, Kelly triggered another distraction, a series of car alarms blaring from the SUVs parked outside. "Split up and find them," Mr. Cross barked, his calm demeanor cracking for the first time. As his men scattered, Brenda seized the opportunity. She swung the briefcase at the nearest thug, catching him off guard and knocking him to the ground. Grabbing Cameron's hand, she ran toward the exit, her heart racing. Reggie appeared from the shadows, wielding a metal pipe. "Go. I'll hold them off." "Reggie, no!" Brenda shouted. "Just go," he yelled, charging at one of the armed men. Brenda hesitated for a split second before pulling Cameron along with her. The showdown. As Brenda and Cameron reached the far end of the warehouse, Mr. Cross stepped into their path, his gun trained on them. "Impressive," he said, his smirk returning. "But you can't outrun me." Brenda positioned herself in front of Cameron, her hands raised. "Let him go. He's just a kid." Mr. Cross tilted his head, studying her. "You're braver than I expected." "Stupid, but brave." "You don't have to do this," Brenda said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "You've already got your money." "It's not just about the money," Mr. Cross said, his tone darkening. "This is personal. That briefcase was meant to fund something important, something I can't afford to lose. And you stole it." Before Brenda could respond, Reggie appeared behind Mr. Cross, bloodied but still standing. He tackled the man to the ground, the gun skidding across the floor. "Run, Brenda," Reggie shouted, grappling with Mr. Cross. Brenda hesitated, torn between saving her brother and protecting her son. The chaos around her swirled, and she realized she was out of time. What would she do? Brenda's heart raced as she watched Reggie grapple with Mr. Cross, their bodies locked in a desperate struggle. The dim light of the warehouse cast long shadows, amplifying the tension in the air. Cameron clung to her side, his eyes wide with fear. "Mom, what do we do?" Cameron's voice trembled. Brenda's mind raced, weighing her options. She couldn't leave Reggie to face Mr. Cross alone, but her primary duty was to protect her children. The sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse, signaling that Mr. Cross's men were regrouping. "Stay close to me," she whispered to Cameron. "We need to find a way out." As they moved cautiously toward the nearest exit, Brenda's eyes scanned the environment for anything she could use as a weapon. Her gaze settled on a rusted metal pipe lying amidst the debris. She picked it up, feeling its weight in her hands. "Mom, look out!" Cameron's shout came just in time. Brenda turned to see one of Mr. Cross's henchmen lunging at her. Instinctively, she swung the pipe, striking the man across the jaw. He staggered back, dazed. Drawing from self-defense techniques she had once learned, Brenda delivered a swift knee to his midsection, followed by an elbow strike to his temple, rendering him unconscious. "Come on," she urged Cameron, pulling him along. They navigated the labyrinth of crates and machinery, the sounds of struggle and shouted orders filling the air. Brenda's thoughts were a whirlwind, but one thing remained clear. They had to escape. Reggie, meanwhile, fought fiercely with Mr. Cross. Despite his injuries, he managed to land a solid punch, causing Mr. Cross to stumble. But Mr. Cross was relentless, quickly recovering and launching a counterattack. "You're out of your depth," Mr. Cross sneered, aiming a kick at Reggie's midsection. Reggie dodged, breathing heavily. "Maybe, but I won't let you hurt my family." With a surge of determination, Reggie tackled Mr. Cross, sending them both crashing to the ground. The impact jarred Mr. Cross's gun loose, skidding across the floor toward Brenda. Seeing the opportunity, Brenda released Cameron's hand and sprinted toward the weapon. She reached it just as Mr. Cross shoved Reggie off him, his eyes locking onto her. "Brenda, don't!" Reggie shouted, struggling to his feet. But Brenda's resolve was unyielding. She aimed the gun at Mr. Cross, her hand steady. "It's over. Leave us alone." Mr. Cross chuckled darkly, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Do you really think you can win this? There's no escaping me." Before Brenda could respond, the distant wail of sirens pierced the tension. Red and blue lights flashed through the grimy windows of the warehouse. "Mom, the police!" Cameron exclaimed, hope lighting up his face. Mr. Cross's expression shifted from arrogance to anger. "You called the cops? This isn't over, Brenda." As law enforcement officers stormed the warehouse, Mr. Cross and his remaining men attempted to flee, but they were quickly apprehended. An officer approached Brenda, gently taking the gun from her trembling hands. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, concern in his eyes. Brenda nodded, pulling Cameron into a tight embrace. "We are now. Thank you." Reggie limped over, a weary smile on his face. "Looks like we made it." Tears welled in Brenda's eyes as she hugged her brother. "I couldn't have done it without you." In the aftermath, as Mr. Cross and his operation were dismantled by law enforcement, Brenda reflected on their harrowing journey. The trauma and losses they had endured were profound, but they had emerged stronger, united by their love and determination to protect one another. Weeks later, the family arrived in Texas. The scars of their ordeal remained, but so did their resilience. As they stood together in front of their new home, Brenda felt a renewed sense of purpose. "We've been through a lot," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "But we're here, together, ready to start this new chapter." Kelly and Cameron nodded, their faces reflecting both the hardships they had faced and the hope for the future. Reggie placed a hand on Brenda's shoulder. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it as a family." Brenda smiled, looking at her family with pride and love. "Yes, we will." As they walked into their new home, the sun setting behind them, Brenda knew that while the road ahead might still hold challenges, they had the strength and unity to overcome anything. Their journey had transformed them, forging an unbreakable bond that would guide them through whatever lay ahead. In the quiet of their new beginning, Brenda whispered a silent promise to herself, to cherish every moment, to protect her family with unwavering determination, and to embrace the future with hope and courage. And so, with hearts full of resilience and a renewed sense of purpose, the family embarked on their new chapter, ready to face the future together.